In thinking about Mother's Day and my own mother this week, the thing that kept floating to the top of my mind time and time again is all the grief I gave her for all the crazy mischief I did. Yes, I may look like a civilized person standing before you today, but as a younger person, I did things that I dare not recount, but which gave my mom great grief. I remember one time I went outside and I was looking for friends to play with, and I couldn't find any. And so I kept wandering around looking for friends. And I ended up going from our home to a little town near us that was about 1.5 miles away called Fairfield, Alabama. And I walked all the way there and all the way back. And I was probably, 7 years old. And when I got back, my mom was just freaked out, and so I kept remembering things like that. So to mothers everywhere, great love to you for all you've got to endure, not only when they're children, but when they become adults and everything else. Being a mother comes in many forms. There's the old-fashioned way, of course, giving birth to a child. Then there are people who adopt. My wife and I adopted 2 children from China. I'm familiar with that model, and my wife is surely as a mother as authentically as any other mother, although we adopted. Then there are aunts and cousins and grandparents who step in and play the role of mothering. Then there are people who fall outside of these models who are mothers of a special sort. I remember a woman in Florida, where I lived and worked there for a number of years, who was a nun, who had a group of nuns that had their own nunhood, for lack of a better term, and they had secular jobs. And this particular nun was a very highly trained psychotherapist who ran wonderful programs, teaching seminars, had wonderful speakers from all over the country, and was de facto a mother to many people. And she would have laughed if you had said that of her, but she was a formative influence on many people. Of course, never married, never had children, but she very much had a mothering presence in the lives of many. And then there's people who even stand even further outside the norms and classifications, such as Jane Goodall. Jane Goodall took mothering to another species and really mothered that other species that she lived with and studied, and brought forth their realness as persons, if you will, from a separate species. I know many people, and you might be one of them, who regard their dogs or their cats with a maternal intensity to rival the mothering toward any human. So motherhood is a complex and multifaceted role that transcends biology while also including it, and extends to all of those who are nurturing and caregiving and supporting of others. So today we celebrate not only those who gave birth, but those who embrace the role of mother through adoption, foster care, mentoring, and 1,000 other ways. We also acknowledge that families come in diverse configurations, which we in our own time are becoming increasingly aware of. So whether a mother is cisgender or transgender, singled or partnered, biological or chosen, each path is unique and precious and valuable. And so we must also acknowledge the fact, and I do this out of my experience as a pastor, acknowledge the fact that for some people, Mother's Day and the image of mother is challenging and problematic because their relationship to their mother might not have been ideal or might have been problematic and difficult in numerous ways. Let us acknowledge those people too, for whom the relationship with mom is challenged and troubled. And let us also acknowledge the nuances of the challenges of modern motherhood. Balancing responsibilities, the loss of personal time, sleep, deprivation, emotional demands. Oh my God, the intensity of being a parent and being a mother. The number and intensity of decision making that you do. One time we had to make a decision about our youngest. She was having symptoms that were not being diagnosed by the doctors we were going to. And I was away at the time from the house, and Alphys made the decision to take our daughter, Lily, our youngest, and her appendix was about to burst, and we didn't know it. And she had had all these unusual symptoms for weeks. And we had gone to doctors, and they hadn't diagnosed it. We got to the hospital, and the doctor who happened to be there diagnosed Lily, our youngest, and said, we're going to operate her on her right now. 15 minutes later, she was in the operating room. How many parents make decisions like that? You know, if you're a parent, if you're a mother, you make some intense decisions. Financial pressures. Wow. Children are expensive. Don't get me started on that. Social expectations and judgments. Are you a mother? Do you have a profession? What value do you derive from being a parent? Our society tragically devalues parenthood. How do you navigate that? The work-life balance for those who choose to work. These and many other challenges face people today. Far more complicated and nuanced than what I have described. Yet in the face of these challenges, mothers persist, demonstrating an uncommon resilience and determination and a fierce love. So this holiday is complicated and can be messy, as life is messy. But despite all of this, I say to all mothers everywhere and to each of you of whatever type and variety, we honor you today. The idea of Mother's Day has roots deeply in the human condition. Remember, way before the monotheistic religions took over Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, before that, quite often there were many throughout the world and the cultures of the world, religions revolving around women. And so there's a sense and appreciation of the feminine, the power of the feminine in the human species that goes way back. But Mother's Day also has roots in ancient Greek and Roman history, in the festivals in honor of the mother goddess Rhea and Sybil. Another antecedent for Mother's Day is the early Christian festival known as Mothering Sunday. It was once a major tradition in the United Kingdom and parts of Europe. This celebration fell on the fourth Sunday in Lent and was originally seen as a time where people went back to their mother church. But over time, it morphed into an appreciation for mothers and the giving of gifts to mothers. The origin of Mother's Day, as celebrated in the United States, dates back to the 19th century. During the Civil War, there was a woman named Anne Reeves Jarvis who cared for wounded soldiers on both sides of the American Civil War and created Mother's Day work clubs to address public health issues. In 1868, Jarvis organized Mother's Friendship Day, at which mothers gathered with former Union and Confederate soldiers to promote reconciliation. Is that not fascinating? The clubs formed by Jarvis later became a unifying force in a region of the country, the Southeast and Kentucky and West Virginia, still divided over the Civil War and the associated tensions. Another precursor of Mother's Day came to us from the abolitionist and women's voting rights advocate Julia Ward Howe. Howe is a fascinating, utterly fascinating figure, best known for her writing of the Battle Hymn of the Republic. She was also a Unitarian who sometimes preached, when it was unusual for women to preach, from the pulpit of Boston's esteemed Church of the Disciples, of which she was a member. In 1870, Howe wrote the Mother's Day Proclamation, which called for peace and encouraged mothers to come together to promote harmony and peace in society. Here is an excerpt from her proclamation that will give you a sense of the flavor of her thinking. Now, this was in 1870. This was 5 years after the end of the Civil War. She wrote, "We will not have great questions decided by irrelevant agencies. Our husbands shall not come to us reeking with carnage for caresses and applause. Our sons shall not be taken from us to unlearn all that we have taught them of charity, mercy, and patience. In the name of womanhood and of humanity, I earnestly ask that a general Congress of Women, without limit of nationality, may be appointed and held at some place deemed most convenient and at the earliest period consistent with its objective, to promote the alliance of the different nationalities, the peace settlements of international questions, the great and general interest of peace." My goodness, we need that organization today, do we not? Do you see a theme there? Women standing against the chaos, the ignorance, and the madness of men's warring propensities and trying to bring about a world of peace. In 1873, Howe campaigned for a Mother's Peace Day to be celebrated every June the 2nd. However, the official Mother's Day arose in the 1900s as the result of Anna Jarvis, the daughter of the aforementioned Anne Reeves Jarvis. Following her mother's death in 1905, Anna Jarvis conceived of Mother's Day as a way of honoring the sacrifices mothers made for their children. After gaining financial backing from a Philadelphia department store owner in May of 1908, she organized the first official Mother's Day celebration at a Methodist church in Grafton, West Virginia. That same day also saw thousands of people attend a Mother's Day event at one of the retail stores in Philadelphia. Anna Jarvis wanted to set aside a day to honor mothers because she believed a mother is, quote, the person who has done more for you than anyone in the world. Anne Reeves Jarvis and Julia Ward Howe urged for the creation of a Mother's Day for Peace, where mothers would ask their husbands and sons would no longer be killed and kill others in war. Following the success of the first Mother's Day, Jarvis, who remained unmarried and childless her whole life, resolved to see her dream become a part of the national calendar. Arguing that American holidays were biased towards male achievements only, she started a massive letter-writing campaign to newspapers and prominent politicians urging the adoption of a special day honoring motherhood. In 1912, many states, towns, and churches had adopted Mother's Day. And Jarvis had established the Mother's Day International Association to promote her cause. Her persistence paid off when in 1914, President Woodrow Wilson signed a measure officially establishing the second Sunday in May as Mother's Day. Well, an interesting thing happened. The holiday quickly became a commercial affair where Hallmark cards, predominantly at the first, began to create cards that people could give their mothers. And Jarvis was outraged by this and continued to protest any commercialization of Mother's Day. She said, everyone should write a special note to their mother that they write with their own hand and give it to their mother, and this should not be commercialized. And she even protested the commercialization of Mother's Day to the point of being arrested a couple of years later. We see some themes emerging from these stories. Women are nature's force for reconciliation, for renouncing war, for curbing the mad propensity of men to engage in war, for bringing communities back together, to reconciling the opposites. One suspects, I think, with reason, that the feminine force in nature is more about peace, building harmonious communities, avoiding conflict, than the masculine force inherent in nature. Dr. Judith Burkhardt, a professor in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Zurich, has taken this issue to a different level. I have corresponded with her on a number of occasions. She and a group of dozens of researchers over a course of 10 years have developed some theories ground in their observations and ground in their research about the evolution of compassion in our species. And without going into the immense detail of her research, around 2 million years ago, our species, the precursors of our species, and the mothers of that precursor to our own species, increasingly relied upon assistance from other group members to supplement care for their offspring. Very, very few species in nature allow people other than themselves to care for their young. It's extremely rare. Our species does. As this pattern rose as a significant factor, it had consequences far beyond simply expanding the circle of group members who would or did aid in the upbringing of an infant, although it did that. And over the long course of evolution, remember these changes occurred over 1.5 million years, an infant's orientation, the human infant orientation, changed as the central role and exclusive role of biological mothers decreased, and the role of family and community members in parenting increased. And over the long course of evolution, youngsters would be conditioned not only to monitor the intentions of others, but increasingly to probe their thoughts or seek to probe their thoughts and feelings as to better conform to the preferences of others, so to elicit the caring response of others. These changes affected the development of our brains as well as the course of evolution. And one consequence of this, Burkhardt notes, was the rise of what she calls proactive pro-sociality, which means being interested in and willing to help others, even when a request for help had not occurred. This is a rare thing that happens in our species. Another highly significant consequence of what she called proactive prosociality was the strengthening of the potential for cooperative behavior, even between people who had very little history or knowledge of one another. Another consequence over the long history of evolution was shared intentionality. Shared intentionality is the ability to participate with others in collaborative activities of any kind. Proactive prosociality, our hyper cooperation, our ability to engage in shared intentionality are interwoven with our development as a species. They all derive from the consequences of the rise and then the prevalence of a mother's raising their children with others. Suffice it to say, to sum it all up, that what today we call empathy, consideration of others, compassion, willingness to help others, a willingness to engage with others in a cooperative effort where we're going in the same direction, all arose from the female side of our species in broadening the sharing of responsibility for the taking care of children. Now that gives a lot of substance to the reason for honoring mothers. Our humanness, if you will, is ultimately derived from the role of the mother. So today, we honor the feminine spirit and concretely each mother of whatever type and their contribution to our common world.